based on feedback we got from the audience on an earlier session on Afghanistan, that we needed to have more discussion. So thank you, Mr. Riaz Mohammad Khan and Mr. Noorani, for agreeing to be with us on short notice, less than 1 day. And thank you, audience, for being with us. Riaz Mohammad Khan, for those of you who were not with us yesterday, served as Pakistan's Foreign Secretary from 2005 to 2008 and has been ambassador to China, European Union, Belgium, and Kazakhstan and Kyrgyzstan. He is the author of 2 books on Afghanistan, not just a diplomat, but he's an academic as well. And he's the author of Untying the Afghan Knot, Negotiating the Soviet Withdrawal. And this was published in 1991 by Duke University. And his second book is Afghanistan and Pakistan, Conflict, Extremism and Resistance to Modernity, which was published by Oxford University Press in Pakistan and also published in the US. And he also has a coffee table book called Pakistan Glimpses of Vistas, History and Culture. So thank you, Mr. Riaz Mohammad Khan. You have invaluable experience and we'd like to learn more about you, your experiences of Pakistan and Afghanistan. Also with us is Mr. A.G. Noorani, who is a prominent Indian lawyer and columnist specializing in constitutional law and history. His columns in the Indian Express are well known. He also writes regularly for the Frontline, Chennai, India, and for Dawn in Karachi. Mr. Noorani has authored several books, including Jinnah and Tilak, Indo-China Boundary Dispute, Constitutional Questions and Citizens' Rights, The Trial of Bhagat Singh, and Indian Political Trials. More recently, The Destruction of Hyderabad was published just last year. And his latest book is The Kashmir Dispute, which is to be published this year. It's forthcoming, I believe. It's not out yet. So thank you. It is already out yet. Thank you, Mr. Noorani, for being with us. And we would like to draw our panelists into a discussion about Afghanistan and its linkages with Pakistan, and a little bit of the history of the challenges that the Afghan state and nation have faced, and also the consequences of those challenges, the Soviet intervention, issues of Pashtun nationalism, and the resistance to the Soviet and the Pakistani responses to the issues of Pashtun nationalism, Soviet expansionism, Cold War, and the imperatives that placed on Pakistan. So it's a very long and complex history that has resulted in this kind of a vortex or the perfect storm that Pakistan today finds itself in, where its traditional policy seems to have resulted in a lot of unexpected consequences, to say the least. And we are in the process of trying to redefine our Afghan policy. We are in the process of trying to redefine the kind of country and the kind of society that has emerged as a result of our interventions in Afghanistan and as a result of our policies related to Afghanistan. So it's a very central issue to Pakistan and where we are currently faced. That's why we like to get the views of possibly Pakistan's leading experts on this issue. So Mr. Riaz, could you tell us, a little bit of the history of how did Afghanistan come to play such a central role in Pakistan, because it really seems to have been the driving force in some of the biggest policy decisions that have been made over the years.
Well, thank you very much for this very generous introduction to me. But let me say at the outset that A.G. Noorani Sahab is my elder, and I have greatest respect for him, for the work that he has done, especially his research on the early history of partition and subsequently on Kashmir. He has dug into things which have really expanded my personal understanding, and I'm sure many people must have benefited from the vast knowledge that he has of those times. So first I would like to defer to you, sir. You may like to make some remarks before I try to address what Umar has asked me
I would
to
not
do.
like this to be turn by turn. I mean, please feel free to respond to each other's comments or just have this a regular discussion rather
Yeah,
than.
Sahib, thank you very much for your generous words. But I do wish to say that older than I may be in your age, you are vastly more knowledgeable. I would like to perform the core duties with Umair Sahib of being a muezzin who calls the faithful to prayer and leave you to offer the imamat. I have already jotted down the questions which I would request you to address. In the course, I will offer my views. The pre-1979 phase. Now, Brzezinski said in an interview to Nouvel Observateur that even before the Soviet invasion, the Americans had begun arms supplies to the Mujahideen. And he said it with great pride. Must read this with the Lana Isnad Jasusi, those 50 volumes to which scholarship in South Asia and in the West has done no service at all. They are invaluable. One of the documents is a conversation between Bruce Amstutz, the American ambassador, who later came to Bombay as Consul General, and Schweisfurt, the East German ambassador, whom the Russians used to convey messages. And they conveyed messages as if this belongs to us, but we are keeping you informed. Namely, we might intervene. The Americans knew about the intervention. Now, in 1991, they gave a stern warning which prevented an invasion of Poland. This time, they leaned back. I've heard American ambassadors, American envoys say, we want it to be a bleeding wound for the Soviets, just as Vietnam was for us. This is the phase on which I would like Riaz Sahib to dilate. Next, of course, there's his masterpiece, Untying the Golden Knot, which I reviewed even before I had the pleasure of meeting Riaz Sahib. It's a masterpiece. He has given it. Now, at that time, I believe there was a split between Junejo, Zain Noorani on one hand, and Ziaul Haq on the other. At the last minute, Ziaul Haq said, Zain Noorani himself told me, Zain, you'll be lynched. Don't sign there. And he said, Mr. President, don't speak to me like this. Ziaul Haq wanted agreement on an interim government before the withdrawal. And that would have put the spanner in the works. So I would like you, Riaz Sahib, to dilate on that.
I think we can start with this.
Yeah. Achha.
Otherwise, I'll forget the questions. Okay. Well, thank you, Noorani Saab, and thank you, Omayr, for asking me these questions. Pre-1979 scenario. Were the Americans involved? Were they not involved? Were they... and I think what you are talking about is the period after the Saur Revolution, April 1978, and before the Soviet intervention. I think our understanding of why the Soviets came in is facilitated by the fact that now all those documents, including the discussions which took place in the Politburo prior to the invasion of Afghanistan, they are sending the troops, are available. So one doesn't have to speculate about this thing. What had happened that after the Saur Revolution, two personalities were in the forefront in Afghanistan. One was Hafizullah Amin, who was a strong man. He thought that he could be like another Tito or another Stalin. And there was the other personality, Noor Muhammad Taraki, who was a softer personality and better liked. But it was Hafizullah Amin who had brought about this revolution, overthrew the Dawood, because of his contacts within the Afghan army. Now, Hafizullah Amin started a program of reforms, including the gender reforms, the liberalization, the women's education, etc., even in the rural areas. And that started creating a reaction similar to what King Amanullah had started, and that had brought about a reaction within the rural Afghan society. Now, within Afghanistan, within the Soviet Union in Moscow, there was this debate because this thing was building up. There may have been some support from outside, but that support was not really meaningful. That was not the kind of support which the Mujahideen started getting after 1979. This we have to bear in mind. So the Soviets felt that here this man, Hafizullah Amin, are pushing us in a direction where there may be a people's revolt in the rural areas, etc. So why not bring the softer personality on top? And you would recall that in August 1979, the Taraqi had gone to Havana. There was a summit, and then he came to Moscow. He stayed in Moscow for almost about 2 weeks. And when he came back to Kabul, Hafizullah Amin did not come to receive him at the airport because he sniffed that there was something cooking up. It was at the behest of Mr. Puzanov, who was the ambassador at that time of Soviet Union in Kabul, and who was like a viceroy dictating things, that at his behest the two personalities, they agreed to meet. And in that meeting, the wrong man got eliminated. It was Taraqi who got eliminated and Hafizullah Amin survived. Here was a situation where there was no, the confidence was lost between Hafizullah Amin and Moscow. Hafizullah Amin was then trying to reach out to Pakistan. In Iran, there was already a revolution. You would recall that episode of Mr. Shahi trying to go, but was prevented because of snow in Kabul in December. There are all kinds of conspiracy theories, but now this is part of the records of Politburo. There in Politburo, there was an intensive debate in which they said what to do because they could not engineer a coup from within Afghanistan, because the army was under the control of Hafizullah Amin. And Hafizullah Amin wanted to reach out now to the outside because there was no confidence between Moscow and him. So there was a split decision, and it was Brezhnev's vote that he finally decided that, all right, we have to go. The ideologues were in favor of intervention. The others, people like Andropov, they were against an intervention. But then finally Brezhnev decided, he said, we will go, and probably in 6 months' time, we will be able to settle things. So they went, they dislodged, killed Hafizullah Amin, brought Babrak Karmal, who was in Czechoslovakia, and the rest is history, as you know. So I would like to say that we should not give too much importance about these news that some support, arms, etc. were given to the Afghans at that time. This was the background of that invasion. The important thing was Pakistan's reaction afterwards. We did not know, there was a debate at that time that whether the Soviet Union was trying to reach out to the warm waters, Peter the Great, you know, all that. So whether it was that kind of a move or it was something else. But then this debate was finally decided by the argument that, look, it is the pattern of the Soviet expansion that if the Soviet Union is able to stabilize itself in one country, then the next country comes under pressure. This was the deciding. Therefore, we decided, and also I would say that Ziaul Haq saw for himself an opportunity that he could catapult himself on the world stage. So this is part of history. So this is what I want to say about the pre-1979. Now, Junejo, Ziaul Haq, and we are into 1988. when the Geneva Accords came to a head. Now, Geneva Accords have a long history. I don't want to go into that. And there is no doubt that in the beginning, even Pakistan wanted that there should be a government, broad-based government, etc. But we agreed finally to the UN, because UN could not consider this agenda of changing the government in Afghanistan, because Afghanistan was represented in the United Nations by the Babra Karmal regime and then later on the Najibullah regime. So that could not be done. Therefore, it was focused on the withdrawal of the foreign troops and that the Soviet Union must give a time frame. And for 4 years, this thing went on. But there was this thought in the minds of people in Islamabad that once the Soviet Union will decide to leave Afghanistan, then they may be interested in a broad-based government in Kabul, because otherwise stability would not be achieved. But over the period of time, in a way, this thing was lost, this thought was lost. And then in Pakistan, the politics started changing in 1985 with Mr. Junejo trying to wrest power from Ziaul Haq. And there was this tussle, there is no doubt about it. The Soviets decided to leave Afghanistan in 1986. First person they told about it was Najibullah. He visited Moscow in September 1986. He was told that they would leave in 2 to 3 years' time. And then Mr. Abdul Sattar, who was Foreign Secretary at that time, he was invited by Mr. Vorontsov, who was Vice Foreign Minister, in December 1986. And that was the first time that they hinted that, look, we want to leave Afghanistan, but let's try that there should be a government of national reconciliation in Kabul. They did not say it in those many words, but they said that there should be a dialogue between the Mujahideen. For the first time, they called these people Mujahideen, whom they used to call Basmatis earlier, and then the Kabul government. Naturally, the suggestion was that there should be a broad-based government. This was lost to us because, one, there was the Junejo-Ziaul Haq tension. There used to be an Afghan cell meeting, and Junejo insisted that he should basically chair that. Ziaul Haq he tried to cut out. So we could not focus on these issues. The second issue that came up was that within the ISI, which was handling, they said that this may be tactical on the part of Soviets, and in fact they probably with this move want to weaken the Mujahideen resistance, because in 1985, after a lot of discussions and a lot of I would say vacillation, the Americans had finally agreed to provide stingers, and stingers were hurting the Soviets. So time was lost. We kept on pressing in Geneva on the time frame. Towards the end of 1987, the Soviet Union, they announced a time frame of 1 year. It was at that time that that Ziaul Haq, he immediately sensed that the Soviets are very serious. So he revived the proposal for a broad-based government. But then, on one hand, these Mujahideen, who had developed their own ambitions, and when Ziaul Haq made this statement that my formula is 1/3, 1/3, 1/3, so Yunus Khalis, who was the spokesman for the Mujahideen, he said that is Ziaul Haq's formula, that is not our formula. There are many episodes I can recount. Lastly, it was Vorontsov who came in February 1988, and he said, we have reduced the time frame to 10 months. And he met Ziaul Haq and he said, please agree and sign Geneva. Ziaul Haq said that, look, I am going to say that now the Soviets are in Afghanistan at my invitation. but let us work for a broad-based government. He pressed. Warren Saw finally said, all right, my mandate given by Gorbachev was that I convince you to accept the time frame and signing Geneva. But that you are insisting, I am prepared to go back, provided you agree on two things. That one, Mujahideen will start dialogue with Najibullah. Second, let's have a cut-off date, 3 months or so, and then if they do not agree on any broad-based government, then you will sign Geneva, we will leave. Ziaul Haq somewhat waffled on this. And he said, and I remember the words, and they are recorded, that Mr. President, whatever you had been saying was tactical. We are leaving with or without Geneva. If we leave without Geneva, there would be incalculable consequences for Pakistan and our relations. So after that, the meeting ended. Ziaul Haq asked everybody who was present, and I was also present in that meeting, that what are those incalculable consequences? Anyway, after that, the focus was on this so-called question of symmetry, which was then basically clinched. And then on 7th of April, Ziaul Haq announced that now my concerns are satisfied and we will sign Geneva. And there was also an agreement that Mr. Cordovez, who was the special representative, he would continue his good offices for a broader-based government, etc., all that. But then Geneva was signed. After that, it's again a long story. I would not go into that, but you raised these issues, therefore I have gone into these.
So do you think...
You mentioned about the Pakistan-Afghanistan relationship. I may mention that Pakistan-Afghanistan relationship always been at two levels. They should be seen at two levels. One is the Kabul-Islamabad relationship, which has ups and downs, tensions, etc., whatnot. The other is people-to-people relationship, which is unique and which doesn't have a parallel anywhere in the world because of the shared demography, shared geography, shared culture, and shared history. So these are two different levels. Therefore, I personally believe that we do not have a threat from Afghanistan in the conventional sense. There will be no armies marching from Kabul towards Peshawar. There is absolutely no way. But there is another kind of threat. And that is the threat that you see today of Talibanization. Now, why I call Talibanization a threat? Because this is a phenomena which basically impedes Pakistan moving with the spirit of times. I can go on further, but I think you will have
but
some.
I think the point I was making was that, before we even get into the US and Soviet, role in Afghanistan, even in the 70s, as a government had changed and revolution had come, Afghanistan had a very aggressive policy on the Durand Line, and there was a lot of internal, dissent and certain amount of worry. I don't know, maybe you can tell us more about the extent of that fear. So, I mean, did we have some of this Talibanization, some of that policy starting, even before Soviet intervention? Or is it, as you said, more a post-79 thing? And what role will that have now? Because now again we have a government in Kabul which is talking about, Durand Line and protesting about.
Yeah, Durand Line, it's an emotional issue. It's a burden of history which the Afghans carry. They never really accepted the Gandamak Treaty of 1998.
People say the Durand Line is for Afghanistan what Kashmir is for Pakistan. It's very popular.
No, let's not draw that kind of comparison because Kashmir is a different kind of an issue, involves people, their rights. Here we are talking about a border. You would be interested to know that a formulation which was there on the Durand Line suggesting an inference which was there for international border, that was the last issue which was decided in Geneva. And that basically required Mr. Shevardnadze to travel to Kabul, and then in Kabul did not agree, and he had to request Pakistan to agree to a rather ambiguous kind of a formulation. So the Afghan sentiment is very strong on this. I don't think that, for example, when the Mujahideen came into power and we suggested that, they said, look, between brotherly countries there should be no borders. So they basically sidelined the question. Taliban said the same thing. So pushing the Kabul government to accept Durand Line is unrealistic. But at the same time, everybody accepts it as a functional border. And the NATO presence in Afghanistan has in fact reinforced this. Because what is the red line? Red line is that there would be no boots across the Durand Line. So this is an international recognition of the border. We should not push the Afghans to, but what we should try is that we should try to regulate this border as much as possible through biometrics, through other means, through having, designated exit and entry points, etc., all that. So that we should do, and we should also try to integrate the tribal areas with the rest of Pakistan. That has been, we have been remiss as governments, as people, as society in doing that. So that's a different issue, but we should not try to push any government in Kabul because it would not be able to recognize the Durand Line per se. But it is a de facto border, it is a functional border, and it will stay like that. I may mention, for example, that even in 2005, 2006, we had proposed that we are going to mine and fence the border. Mining is necessary with fencing because fencing can be destroyed in no time. So there has to be mining. And basically the resistance came from the Western communities who are very much against mining, using landmines. And secondly, it was very strongly opposed by Kabul.
So is that something that Pakistan is still interested in pushing forward? Because that's one of the most effective ways of controlling cross-border movement of insurgents that, Afghanistan and Pakistan are affected by.
I think the mining of the border would create a lot of problems internally also, but we should have a strong monitoring and strong fencing that we should think, and also regulating. But these things will come not quickly. I think the first steps are that what is our policy vis-a-vis the Taliban, vis-a-vis the government, and the whole question of the conflict and national reconciliation. Yeah. First thing, we have to be very clear in our minds and in our narratives. Conflict hurts Pakistan more than any other country except Afghanistan itself. We should be very clear on that. Yesterday, in fact, it was Dr. Maliha Lodi who had mentioned Allama Iqbal's very famous verse, Az fasade-u fasade Asiya, az kushade-u kushade Asiya, that if there is turmoil in Afghanistan, there would be turmoil in Asia. I wish there would be turmoil in Asia, because then Asia will join hands to do this thing. This turmoil, somehow or the other, is only affecting Pakistan. We should understand that. And continuation of the conflict and any policy which would basically, in my view, two things will be responsible for continuation of the conflict if the Americans leave, if NATO forces leave. One would be regional rivalries. Second would be playing favorites. So if we play favorite, we would basically be helping the continuation of the conflict, and who will suffer? Apart from Afghanistan, it is Pakistan which will continue to suffer. So we have to be very clear in our narrative. And therefore reconciliation. For reconciliation, the most important thing is that we at least try to impress upon these Afghan Taliban leaders who are here, that they must engage in the process of reconciliation. And they should also stop, because after all, they are enjoying hospitality on Pakistani territory. Therefore, if using Pakistani territory for activities, for operations which bring embarrassment to us, create problems for us, That also must be, we should be clear in our, at least conveying this message that this must be stopped. It will take time. As I also mentioned yesterday, that there is going to be no neat end to the Afghan conflict, but if we are, in terms of our institutional setups, the army, the foreign office, the government, politicians, if we are on the same page on this, and if we are convinced that we are from now onwards going to treat Afghanistan as a state, not as an extension of Pakistan, then I think we would basically be helpful towards the stabilization of Afghanistan, which is in the best interest of Pakistan.
Indeed. Thank you. Sir, would you have any? Oh.
Well, let me begin with the Durand line. I'm not half as knowledgeable as my friend Riaz Mohammad Khan Sahib, but I've done a little research. I think the Afghan case on it is profoundly dishonest. The Durand line was reaffirmed as late as 1921 by the Anglo-Afghan Treaty. It is affirmed. Afghanistan was a founder member of the League of Nations. It never raised a dispute at the League of Nations. It was in 1947, early 47, that it began to raise the issue with the British. And the British snubbed the Afghans. They said it's already concluded. Now, here I may tell you, as well as dissent on a host of issues, I have dissented with the mainstream Indian opinion on Durand Line also. I may tell you, based on informed sources, that in the wake of the Cold War, began with Kashmir, and there was a serious attempt to question Durand Line, just as there was a serious attempt here to question the McMahon Line. But one of the few accurate statements by Mr. Jaswant Singh is that we are born of the same womb. Now that is legally true, and I'll tell you how. The Indian Independence Act empowered the Governor General to make orders regarding a host of issues. One of them regarded international agreements. There was a pact. Even Karnov said India was a successor state. Qaeda-e-Azam rejected that, and a compromise was arrived at. Now, in international law, the treaty runs with the land. So the Governor General's order mentions the McMahon Line, the Indo-Tibetan exchange, as well as the agreements on the Durand Line. India cannot contest the Durand Line any more than Pakistan can contest the McMahon Line. Now, as far as I am concerned, I think both are bound by the same thing, because this order by Mountbatten was the result of an Indo-Pak agreement preceding the order. That's one. Secondly, Nehru unwisely said McMahon Line is our border, maps or no maps. In that case, it was understandable, but it is much more understandable in Pakistan's case. This is our border, and we leave it at that. I would suggest, if I may, a publication of a blue book would be itself a political event. But nothing prevents the Institute of Strategic Studies or any of the government bodies from producing a blue book containing the entire treaty-making thing with copious documents and showing how it progressed for stage by stage the British. There's not one country in the world which questions the Durand Line except Afghanistan. Now this brings me to another aspect on which I wish Khan Sahib would dilate, that is the India factor on Indo-Pak thing. Unfortunately, based on the Durand Line, Najibullah Khan, whatever his name was, the ambassador of Afghanistan had a free run of the place, and I am the proud owner of a collector's item, a book on Pakhtunistan, which gives the map, and it's a very revealing map. To this day, Afghanistan has not precisely defined the frontiers of its Pakhtunistan. Now, at this point, may I now pose the rest of the questions for my friend Mr. Riaz Mohammad Khan. Was there any prospect of the negotiations because the Taliban, so with the little I've heard from the National Security Archive, were knocking at America's doors, give us recognition, give us recognition. And even after 9/11, they did ask in deferred. And it's a singularly unfortunate thing that you had Madeleine Albright declaiming from the steps of the Foreign Office in Islamabad that they are useless people and denouncing them. The Americans are just new to diplomacy. You don't abuse people with whom you have to negotiate or to negotiate. Secondly, there was a possibility, I found it in Murshid Sahib's book, and was it possible to arrive at, now I know that Faisal Turki overplayed his hands by abusing Mullah Omar. And Mullah Omar did the incredible. He went to the adjoining room, picked up a bucket of water and poured it over his head. These are the people with whom one has to negotiate. And this kind of cultural difference, one must reckon in any sensible negotiation. I would like Hansab to address on that. Then...
Well, thank you. Thank you. I'll just say one word about, one sentence about Durand Line. There are legalities of things and there are politics of things. As far as Pakistan is concerned, Durand Line is the legal international border between Pakistan and Afghanistan. Our formal position is that this is a non-issue. You are right, Afghans have never been able to define what is their border, what is Pashtunistan's border. Pashtunistan issue in a way became almost dead after the Soviet invasion, but the Pashtun sentiment remains, which has now got channeled into other areas, the jihadi militancy and also an anger because they feel that Kabul has been wrested from under their control. That's a separate issue. So the question of Durand Line, for us it is a legal line, and if there has to be any doubts, the presence of NATO, as I said, has reinforced that position, because that is the red line. No boots across the Durand Line, no the firing, nothing. So basically, our position has been further reinforced by these developments. Then, sir, your question about the Taliban, whether there was a possibility of any negotiations. Yes, I see that international community abandoning Afghanistan was a mistake, which most of them now realize, that Afghanistan became completely isolated and it became the hub, a place for safe havens of all these Arab radicals who then later on joined hands to form Al-Qaeda, and Al-Qaeda's agenda was not Afghan specific, it was basically relating to the Gulf, and it was also relating to the Palestinian issue to start with. If the international community had not abandoned Afghanistan and had kept the doors open for assistance, etc., first they might have influenced the conflict between the Mujahideen factions. Even when the Mujahideen factions, they left and the Taliban came, if the international community were present in Kabul, at least they would have been helpful in moderating the Kabul faction of the Taliban under President Mullah Rabbani. Mullah Rabbani was the president, and Mullah Omar remained all the time in Kandahar. So there was a Kandahar faction, and there is a speculation that there were some tensions between the two. Unfortunately, Mullah Rabbani died of cancer later. So there is an argument that the international community should have kept the Taliban engaged. Now that is one aspect. The episode that you are recounting, which was Prince Turki al-Faisal going, it was relating to Osama bin Laden, that he should be, he asked Mullah Omar that he should be handed over to the Saudis. And in that he said that Mullah Omar had promised him, that is Prince Turki, to hand him over. When Mullah Omar said that he did not say so, he never promised, so he unfortunately said that you are lying. Now, in a tribal kind of a society, and the Saudis should better understand their tribal values and ethics, it was like an abuse. And therefore he went out and then came back, poured the cold water on his head and then said that you Saudis are doing this, etc. Meeting ended, Saudis left. The Taliban became further isolated. I wish the Saudis had continued to engage, because the whole issue at that time was Osama bin Laden, handing him over to a third country, not to United States, but to Saudi Arabia. This was also our effort even after 9/11 for 1 month before the operation started. So I would tend to agree that had the international community had been more sensitive and continued to stay in Afghanistan, not abandon, then perhaps there may be a possibility that things would have been different. But on the other hand, we should also understand Taliban have a different mindset. They are product of madrasas. They are in a different, they are in a time warp. So basically we have to understand them in dealing with them. But anyway, I don't want to further speculate on that, because this would be all realm of speculation. Had we done this, then this would happen, etc.
Yes. Just based on I just wanted to give this quote I found in a book by Robert Cruz of Stanford University on the Taliban, who quotes Osama as saying that our jihad has two targets. One is America, and the other is the foreign ministry of the Taliban. So I think it's kind of points. I was about to come to this. You already talked.
In Kabul and Kandahar developing, but really it did not surface. It did not come to the fore. But you would recall that Bill Richardson, he visited Kabul, he met Mullah Rabbani, he made certain promises, and later on this Taliban faction in Kabul was reminding our ambassador Aziz Ahmad Khan that look, there were so many promises, so what happened to those promises? Because Bill Richardson came and went. Then, of course, towards the end of 1998...
Bill Richardson was the energy secretary?
Yeah. No,
what position did he have at the time when he visited?
Bill Richardson at one time was U.S. permanent representative in the United Nations. Yeah. Then later on, he became governor of Mexico, New Mexico. So he's a politician. But what I'm saying is that there is something to this that had there. But then, after Kenya and Tanzania, which came after Bill Richardson's visit, then the Americans were totally focused on Osama bin Laden and Al-Qaeda, and they were not prepared to listen to anything. They basically wanted him to be handed over either to the Saudis or to them.
Okay. So do you have any question, or should we open to the audience?
I would like to just, last question. I'll skip the bond agreement and post-bond. I would request you to respond to these two issues. What are the options today? How do you see the scenario? And the India factor. How do we address that? Thank you.
Let me take the India factor first. Afghans and Kabul government should, like any other state, develop normal relationship with anybody that they want to. Our expectation and our concern should only be that those relations should not be at the expense of Pakistan-Afghan relationship. That, I think, is a very legitimate expectation on the part of any country. And that is also accepted internationally. So, when it comes to economic assistance, the economic cooperation between India and Afghanistan, I think Pakistan should have no objection to that. But when it comes to the area of army and training armies, etc., there is a history to Pakistan-India relationship. Therefore, there one has to accept that there would be concerns in Pakistan. There would be concerns about the second front, etc., all that. So I think what is necessary is understandings which should not generate rivalries those rivalries will only be a recipe for conflict to continue, and that would not be helpful first and foremost to the Afghans, and we should understand that it is hurtful to Pakistan also. The second part you had said.
What is the scenario as you see now?
Scenario I think is first of all there is the question of the presence of NATO forces, the residual presence. It all depends on the security agreement, the BSA. Now, BSA, my own assessment is that President Karzai is not going to oblige the Americans. He is on his last 2-3 months, and he is not going to sign this agreement and be left with the legacy that he towed the American line and he buckled under the American pressure. But therefore, he is coming up with many reservations. He says it should be it should specifically say that the United States will help Afghanistan against Pakistan or many other conditionalities. Yeah. I think the next president.
Audience questions, or you want to
I just wanted to say that when we look into the future, the most important things are how would this militancy proceed. If it tapers off, if it starts tapering off, then one can see light at the end of the tunnel. In that, reconciliation is the most important process. In reconciliation, Pakistan should play a supportive role, supportive to the council, to the High Supreme Peace Council, supportive to the Afghan government, supportive to even if United States wants help, and also nudge the Taliban, Afghan Taliban leadership towards engaging. We can't press them to accept this agenda or that agenda, but we should at least push them to engage for reconciliation. So that would be a long haul, but that is something which has to be done.
So very quickly, if you can tell me, I mean, we all understand there's reconciliation process going on in Afghanistan, but Pakistan has its own peace talks going on. So what do you think? Are you in favor of the peace talks taking place, and are you optimistic, or is it going to be?
Look, sir, I would briefly say that Pakistan should develop a very clear narrative. It should develop a very clear narrative on Afghanistan, the Afghan Taliban, and also a very clear narrative on the Pakistani Taliban. There is no harm in dialogue, but we should be very clear as to the framework of the dialogue as far as Pakistani Taliban are concerned. Whether this will be within the framework of the constitution, or are we going to talk about something different? And I think we should state it very clearly that, okay, this is something that we would try, but if this fails, then we will have to have some other option. Right. So, clear narrative is the first and foremost requirement on the part of our institutions and our government and our political leaders.
So, Mr. Noorani, you have?
I think.
As far as the India angle is concerned, let me say that I've always believed that India should be sensitive to Pakistan's concerns. Pakistan has primary political, strategic concerns besides economic. India's ties are historic. We had Sikhs there in the Delhi as the continuing entity of the former Raj has something, though that is modified by the 1947 agreement. Unfortunately, at the crucial time, we had a rather weak government and the Kashmir dialogue stalled. I believe that as it progressed, the two leaders should have arrived at a tacit understanding. India should have economic interests, cultural exchanges, but it should not train the Afghan army, because to do that would be to arouse Pakistan's concerns. Oh, and Pakistan should not try to expel Indian interests.
Thank you.
Pakistan should allow that. Now, let me conclude with a brief analogy. It was the famous percentages agreement which Stalin and Churchill had in September 44. They said, you have a dominant sphere of influence here, we have it here. That's the kind of understanding our leaders should have. But we had weak governments.
Thank you. Can we briefly have any questions from the audience before we wrap up? The gentleman in the front row. I think we have.
Just we are discussing again morning Afghan issues, which we have already discussed a lot of on yesterday with distinguished our foreign official personalities and others. But still there is, as Mr. Noorani just say now, the Indian which are making various consulates on the border of Pakistan and within Afghanistan. Why they are not considering to deceive the Pakistani nation as well as and the Pakistani government, for which we are in our people say the mischief thinking are done by the Indian on our border. It should be very alarm, and wherever here is distinguished guest Mr. Noorani is sitting, they should also take the issue to their neta in India.
Thank you, sir.
Let me say it very clearly.
Any other questions?
Consulates are very formalistic, very well-known presence in a country. And today I have not seen in any document, I don't want to talk about the press reports, any document where there are more than the indication of more than 4 consulates of India in Afghanistan. These are the same 4 consulates which we are also maintaining, and all of them were inherited by the 2 countries in 1947. Kandahar, Jalalabad, Mazar-e-Sharif and Herat. Now, Indians certainly have their agents and they have their activities along our border, etc. But sir, I would say that Pakistan must proceed in its policies towards Afghanistan with a great deal of confidence. And that confidence should lie in that people-to-people interaction and people-to-people relationship, that layer of relationship which is centuries old, which is very stable, and no amount of activity by people from this intelligence agency or that intelligence agency can disrupt that. We should proceed with confidence, but we should also be very clear that it is in the interest of both Pakistan and Afghanistan to have stability, and that stability will be when we start treating Afghanistan and they're treating us, Pakistan, on the basis of well-known norms of state-to-state relations.
I think we are out of time. Okay. Thank you very much, Mr. Riaz Mohammad Khan. Thank you very much, Mr. Noorani. Sorry for the brief time we had for questions, but we lost 5 minutes on the electrical problems, but we have more sessions, so we have to move on. Thank you.